So we'll get to my favorite thing that I like to discuss, which is his W. But correct me if I'm wrong. There was a version of the kit, and maybe it was in only for a bit, or maybe I just don't remember this. I could have sworn I played an ability of the kit where it was that ability that you're talking about was E, and it was his current Q, and it was the old W that I'm referring to, and that was a version of the kit I swear I played once. And I think
wait, you got to slow it down. You just threw like 3 abilities at me. Okay, what are you referencing?
So it was his current Q.
Okay.
The old W that we'll talk about in a sec.
Yeah.
You know the one. And then
I know this as well.
And then the E that you were just talking about.
Yeah. That was a version of the kit.
That was a version of the kit, right? Yeah. That was one that I played where I remember being like, this is the greatest champion I've ever played. There's no way we can ever launch this. I was like, that was the one that I was like, I literally probably this would actually make Yasuo not fun to play anymore because this is just too much.
One thing I'll add to make this more clear to people listening about why that combination was so cool was that his tornadoes in that iteration used to push and pull his opponents.
Oh, so, yeah, like, that's right, because then you could, oh my god.
Or pull them in, which meant, looks like your opponent just dashed. So now you get to hunt them down.
Yeah, that was a special time. On that note, let's talk about the Q, his current Q, and the old W, because I think you have a lot of interesting thoughts around. I mean, we'll start with the current Q, actually.
Yeah.
This is the first time, I think. I mean, you could argue we have similar abilities in League, but I think this is the first time we've had an ability this close to another character's ability.
Totally. Yeah, at least like in a way where we tried to make it obvious, right?
Yeah, it's like intentional.
It's like, we have like 4 versions of Mystic Shot in the game, right? But, sometimes you can argue that mechanics like that are so good that they shouldn't just be on one champion. They should be on multiple champions. I think 3-hit passives, another great example of that. But yeah, this was very much intentional, and this is kind of back to like the reason why I like making champions that are characters as opposed to mechanics is because this was like, it started as almost entirely a thematic reason, which was like, well, they're brothers, they trained at the same school, they have literally the same sword, right? Their master probably gave similar weapons to all of them to use to train to learn the techniques, right? So of course they would know the same sword technique, like not all the way as to the wind technique level that Yasuo knows, and that's very intentional that Yasuo can command wind significantly better than Yone. He has the wind wall. He can project his wind out without having to like guide it. Like Yone specifically, his ability is he can't just shoot. A lot of players ask, hey, let me choose whether or not I can shoot the tornado or the wind slash out or not, or dash with it or not, rather, right? It's like, let me choose whether or not I get to go in with it. But it's very, like, yes, there's gameplay reasons, but a big thematic reason here was, well, no, Yone is not as good with the wind technique as Yasuo is. He has to, like, go with it and guide it and kind of, like, nurse the wind slash, and he can only shoot it a little bit of a ways past his weapon or his slash because he's not the fucking grandmaster at it like Yasuo is.
I actually didn't even think of the like thematic tie-in for that aspect of like where the Q is differentiated. But I always loved this idea where, especially because Yone was like, a dual wielding swordsman. We talked about this idea of like, oh yeah, we're gonna be dual wielding. This idea that like, hey, one of his swords is actually like Yasuo's sword, right? Which means one of his abilities is like Yasuo's ability. It's this like not ethereal, like an actual real life sword that uses the same sorts of stuff and techniques that Yasuo uses. I always really like that. And then this idea that he would have another sword that would do different things, which is still actually, I think, shown in the kit, right? It still feels like, he uses that other sword then for his W in a cool way.
Yeah, and I would say somewhat, right? Like, again, I'll be real with you in that we could have done a lot more with the W, I think. And one, there was the unfortunate, hey, we stuck with this other mechanic for a really long time, and so we didn't have a ton of time to explore what else can be on the W. And then also was he's kind of on a unique timeline because we did Kin of the Stained Blade and the Path, and both of those they need to know how Yone fights. And so like if we came screaming out of the gate with this like insanely different mechanic that totally changes how Yone plays, and it's like, well, we just like fucked everyone that was working on this great piece of lore and piece of artwork that's going to propel League story forward when they present something that literally isn't Yone. Right? And so we needed to be empathetic to them and make sure that they had a good understanding of how Yone fought. And so we kind of needed to know these things early. That being said, I think that we do have a decent amount there that still makes it feel like, okay, it's, he has another sword attack, right? It's like, and it's actually funny how often when I was iterating on the other W, and we'll get to that, that people would be like, oh, why don't you just make it a giant cleave attack instead of a poke? And I think that's kind of why we ended up there, is just like so many people, developers and players, were like, the other sword should be a cleave, make it a cleave, but make it like a Yasuo Q, right? It's like, it scales with attack speed and something you use often and all that stuff. And then you'll get this really like relentless feel of like, anytime Yasuo would do one Q, Yone's throwing out his Q and his W, right? And so he's like, because he's got two swords, he's got to use them twice as often, type of thing. And the W just kind of ended up where it did through, like, I'd say like kit necessity. We had everything else on the kit just like so set in stone when we were like finally moving on to like the fine tuning of W. I will say that it did used to also lifesteal instead of a shield. That's something I see players request a lot, especially because it's like, that's the ground level read. And we started there as well. It was like, oh, the demon sword. Of course that sword should fucking lifesteal.
Right.
That's like what demon stuff does. And we did start there. And I like, sad to say that like we had to take a gameplay choice over a thematic choice there, because lifesteal on a resourceless melee champion like that just turns into use this ability on cooldown no matter what. It was literally just like, every time that spell is up, walk up to the wave and lifesteal off the wave.
Yep.
And it's like, that's the best thing that you could do. And that then devolved the ability into essentially like an HP 5 mechanic. It's like, Yone's W becomes, he gets 10 extra health per 5 or whatever, right? And that fucking sucked. It was like, you don't think about the spell interestingly, you don't use it in cool ways, you never hold it, you would just spam it on the wave on cooldown.
And I think this version of the W has a really cool thing, which it gives you a little bit of extra defense and incentivizes the like, I go in big into a big fight, into the inting fight of a 1v2 or a 1v3, but if I can get a juicy W off and shield, like I can maybe tank through this fight, which is pretty sweet.
The goal of like, I could get a W off that hits 4 champions and gain a massive fucking shield to like parry some incoming damage is like a sweet moment to chase. And that also reinforces the general trading pattern in lane of like, oh, I look for moments where I can go in with my E and start fighting, and when they try to retaliate, I parry it with my W shield, and then when the W shield's gonna run out, I peace out. And it's like, yep, and you didn't even damage me at all.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. I'm still trying to learn the like basic Yone mechanic, but like the standard, you're right, the standard bread and butter mechanic feels like I get my Q3, I E Q3 or do something like that to start it. And then it's like, I use that initial bit of CC, damage them, and then as soon as they have the ability to act against me, I W, protect some of their damage, deal damage to them, and right when like I am now able to take real damage from them, that's not just the shield, I just E back.
Exactly.
Later, boom, I just took like a third of your health and you didn't even touch me.
And that's like the main reason Yone doesn't have like the flow shield that Yasuo has, because while like the strength and weakness profile is different, right? It protects, Yasuo's flow shield protects him from poke, whereas this shield, the end result ends up being very similar, like effective health in lane. But Yone, we say, if you want this shield to have value, you need to be aggressive with it. But if you are aggressive with it, it pays off really big. And like that specifically comes out by the fact that you don't get that shield unless you hit something. And the shield, if you hit a champion, is much bigger. And so it straight up says, hey, if you're willing to fight, if you're willing to scrap, then we're going to give you much more effective health than you would be if you were playing like a coward, right? And I think that like just kind of matches their play styles, right? Whereas like Yasuo needs to a lot of the times kind of wait for the right moment to be able to go in for these trades. And when he can't do that, Flow Shield stops him from getting pushed out of lane. Yone has the opportunity to go in and fuck his opponent whenever he wants. And so he basically, we're saying, hey, because you have this option available to you, you need to take advantage of it. And if you do, you'll be rewarded with the same level of effective health that a Yasuo who potentially can't go in gets because he can't go in.
And I think the feeling, because a lot of people have this feeling of like, oh, Yone just feels so squishy. I feel so vulnerable when I play this champ. I think for people who are feeling that way, look at how you're using your W, because that's probably why you're feeling weaker. Like you are just objectively squishy in a glass game. You're going to die unless you're using your W effectively in some of these fights. So
yeah, and he gets to use it significantly more often if he's scrapping too, right? Think about how often Yasuo gets Flow Shield.
Oh yeah,
when he's like in a scrap at level 6, it's like one, and then maybe another if you ult. Like,
yeah,
that's kind of
you can usually count on 2, right? You count on like the start of the fight, then you count on the ult, but you don't get another one after that, right? Whereas like you can be in a longer fight with Yone and have used your W, 3-4 times.
Exactly, yeah. And as long as Yone is continuing to scrap, he'll keep getting it. And a lot of the clips I see nowadays of him being really successful in mid game is he continued to press the advantage and fight, even though it looked like he was on the ropes, knowing that he was going to get another W off, which would give him enough steam to get to his Q3 or get his E2 out with the kill or get to another W or whatever.
All right, on that note, you can answer some quick questions from chat. I have to pee. I drank too much water. Give me 1 sec.
Yeah, do it. I'll see what we've got here. There's a question here, concerns about Yone W being too reliable, like Camille's old heal. So that was definitely more of an issue when it was a heal as well. So that was something that we were thinking about when we changed it from a heal to a shield. But on top of that, there's kind of a couple other components to it here. The first is that, one, it is a shield, and so that health is only going to protect you, of course, for the duration of the shield, and the shield duration is pretty short. It's only 1.5 seconds, so it is much more like a parry. Then it also, unlike most shields in the game, has a cast time. Almost every other shield in the game is instant, and so you kind of have to see or predict the damage coming beforehand, and that's a reason why you get to use it so often. It gets to be as powerful as it ends up being. But also we kind of wanted it to be reliable in that we want, Yone to be able to succeed in mid lane. And so to do that, he needs to have some level of reliable defenses against predominantly ranged opponents. And he doesn't have something like Wind Wall. And we also wanted him to be able to, kind of trade and get some reliable damage against ranged opponents. And that's why the W is such a long range, right? It's enough range that his W can hit an Ashe that's auto-attacking him from max range. And that was by design. But it's one of the reasons as well why the cooldown of it is so long early, because it's so reliable. We don't want him to just be able to continuously get that free damage out, especially because he's resourceless. But once he gets some attack speed, that spell becomes core to his survivability, and so he needs to have access to it much more often. Welcome back, my friend.
I was like, I went to the restaurant. I was just thinking, I was like, I should just bring the champ designers onto my stream every week, and this is the literally the freest content for me in my life. This isn't to knock on people who do interviews, but I'm gonna be honest. I feel like if you're someone who does interviews or talk shows or anything like that, you can be the like most papega like dumbass person ever, as long as the people you bring on are smart and passionate, we'll talk about stuff. I just sit here and I'm like, yeah, like it's all just great stuff, just keep running. And then, like I don't have to do anything.
I appreciate the kind words. But I mean, there's some skill too in terms of like setting up the right questions and stuff like that.
It's
right?
true. I mean, I think this is also like for us, it's always like a comfortable spot. And I think you tune into my show when I'm doing like my talks. I think you and I are just people who just love to just jam and like talk about this stuff, because it's just sweet. Let's get to some spice, because I'm sad it's gone and we're talking about W. I want you to tell my chat about the old W, because I love this.
Okay, so yeah, let's go back in time to when it was first implemented, which is the version of the kit that had the, if your opponent dashes, you basically get a free like Lee Sin Q2 to them, which means targeted dash. You just get to go to them and start fighting them. So the Q was essentially the same thing that he has now, which was
pretty much the same,
build up the stacks and then gain a forward dash that shoots a tornado. And the tornado would knock opponents back slightly.
So it would let you dash to them with the E.
So it would let you dash to them with the E. And then the W was basically the same spell with a couple of changes. The first was, okay, so number one, it was exactly what you were describing before. A Yasuo Q stab. So he has his left sword, Yasuo Q stab, on his Q, and then he had his right sword, Q stab, on his W. Same shape, same speed, scaled with attack speed, all that type of stuff. And that actually felt pretty fucking sweet to be
like. It felt so good.
Dude, it's like, this guy has two swords, right? It's just like, yep, were you trying to tell me this guy has two swords? Because it's really fucking obvious with these two spells that he has two swords. And so that part was fucking great. And then the max version of it, the W3, so to speak, was instead of dashing forward with a tornado, you would dash backwards and fire the tornado. And then the tornado that hit people would pull them towards you slightly. And then so again, you could dash to them if you wanted to. And so like this was all like a really tight package that was like a fantastic pattern in terms of, playing as.
like to be clear, chat, this shit, when I played it, I was like I will never play Yasuo or Akali, any other champion again. It was so good, but you have to understand, like, and the other thing I remember I played in some of one of the like exposure playtests, which for a chat, like, it's like there's like the designers will play in playtests, and there's like there's various playtests that occur at Riot. One of the ones that I would occasionally play in is like technically like a leadership playtest, where it was like, it's like people who like, their job is not to be like that great at League, but it's kind of like, people from around the org and like leadership positions, like, if our balanced team is typically around like what balanced teams, usually, diamond to elo, our playtest team is like mid, high diamond. Some of them are masters. And then you get into like game designers and champion team. I think in champion design playtest, you guys are what, like gold, plat, usually some diamond,
gold,
right?
Plat, it's like the average.
Yeah. These were games where it was like, it's like bronze through diamond is the elo disparity. And I remember playing this kit and just like causing mayhem. I remember just absolutely just doing the stupidest shit on this kit. It felt and to speak to what I was talking about, it really did feel, some people would even mention like DBZ fighting, like imagine like how good and like visceral it feels to like press Yasuo Q or even current Yone Q live, and it was like pressing like QW and doing like and doing like two stabs like that, like 1-2, or like one auto W auto Q. Oh my god, you were just like you literally just felt like you were like just fucking throwing swords out. It felt sweet. It was definitely too good to be true though.
Yeah, it was. And so like the feedback that we got here's the thing, is that like Gat, who's playtest team, was very very convinced that this was fucked up, because it was very fucked up. But their perspective is obviously from mostly super high elo. What, like, if pros are going to break this character, how are they going to do it, right? And that's how we take the data in from them. But we play tested this as well, an actual external play test.
Yeah.
And they came back to us and they're like, this is too fucked up. And we never get that feedback.
Yeah, that's true. It was the player labs were saying it was too fucked up. Yeah.
Player labs are always like super hype, or like, hey, this isn't gonna work, right?
I would say
this is the first time I ever saw literally like, oh, this is working, but you've gone too far, right? Press the go back button.
Yeah, I would say player labs usually are really good. Like we've talked about this even as a strength of player labs versus playtest teams. The player labs are really good at the like what we'd call like the play as identity. They're really good about like if players really like this shit, we know, oh, it's typically good enough for play as. Like Zoe was one where like they were playing Zoe and they're like, yeah, this shit's really fun. Zoe is great. And the people playing against her are like, well, it's kind of fucking nutty, but I just don't know how to play against it yet. So they kind of like ignore it. And it's like only later on that playtest team has played enough times against it that they're like, yo, this shit's actually really tough to play against. So the fact that the player labs were calling it out as like, hey, this is a little too wild was like.
And it was even the people playing as. There was like the people playing as it were like I have too much control. Right?
Yeah, remember there was I think in the first player labs of Yone 2, there was one dude who was like an insane, he was like a like mid diamond Yasuo one trick or something who was playing on Yone. And I remember we have like breaks in the player labs and he was just in the practice tool, like during the breaks that people were like normally eating food or getting snacks or going to the restroom. He was just in the practice tool spamming this character, and then he ended up getting like in this, like in the high elo room where they were playtesting, in the next game he ends up getting like a pentakill and then another quadra kill, and he was just absolutely and the numbers weren't even tuned like that crazy. It was like, holy shit, this kid could just pilot this against people and no one knew what was going on.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was like I won't say a sad day, right? Because I'm glad that you and I got to experience it. But yeah, it was definitely a like. And I think the difference between Certainly T and myself is that Certainly T would have figured out a way to like make that work, right? As opposed to, our approach ended up having to be like, we just didn't really have the time, and so it's like, can we make this work right fucking now? And it didn't really seem like we could, and so we kind of had to take a step back and reevaluate. Right, and that was also at the same time, like I said, we were discussing, hey, that E mechanic is like, it's fucked up, right? Like players, rightfully so, if we put that in the game, players are going to be like, yo, like, it's like it crossed a line in a way that like a Kali Shroud under Tower did, right?
Yeah.
Of like, yeah, Kali does a lot of really fun stuff and is probably like top 2 best design champions in the game, but that specific mechanic felt like it was breaking the like fundamental rules of League of Legends, and this spell felt like it was doing the same thing. And so we kind of just went like, maybe we could get it to work, but it's like we've been working on it a long time and we haven't got there yet, so maybe we need to cut our losses and do something else.